On tonight's edition of the CHGO Cubs Related Podcast, we are about 24 hours from the World Series beginning, but for the Cubs, we enter into the offseason. We'll talk about a tale of two halves in 2025 and the implications for 2026 on tonight's edition of the CHGO Cubs Related Podcast. This is the CHGO Cubs Related Podcast driven by Toyota. Let's go places. Hello, everyone. My name is Corey. I am joined, as always, by Brendan. We are coming to you on Thursday. It is October 23rd. And as I alluded to in our opening here, we are just a day away from the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Toronto Blue Jays beginning the 2025 World Series. Of course, Brendan, unless the rules have changed, that means it doesn't include the Chicago Cubs. So we are in off-season mode. We are waiting to finish the World Series so that the Cubs can make some moves and we can really dive into how Jed Hoyer and company construct the 2026 Chicago Cubs. I will say at first, Brendan, I think across sports, you have to consider this a good day for the Chicago Cubs, as nobody with the organization was arrested by the FBI for gambling today. So that's a good start.
I mean, as far as we know, we'll see what happens tomorrow.
The night is young. Yeah.
The night is young. Crazy day, Gordon.
The night is young. Yes. Yeah. But plenty to talk about here. If you looked at our title, I think the outline for today's show is, as we head into the offseason, the 2025 season for the Chicago Cubs was certainly marked by a tale of two halves. A first half that saw an explosive offense, some major performances from certain guys. And while the second half was not necessarily bad, the Cubs were a few games over 500, a big disparity in the two teams that we saw. We'll talk about what are the reasons for that? And I think more particularly, as Jed Hoyer alluded to in his end of season press conference, what do we make of that? Does it matter? Does it affect how we go into 2026? Is it the makeup of some of these players? Is it the roster construction? Is it the randomness of baseball? We'll get into some of that. I'll start, though, Brendan, before we dive in to all of that with the Chicago Cubs. I feel like this goes without saying, but it's a, normal topic that people on baseball podcasts talk about. I'm assuming you're pulling for the Toronto Blue Jays come tomorrow.
Is there a World Series going on? Baseball season ended for me 2 weeks ago. I'm done. But to answer your question, yes, I am pulling for Toronto. But I'm already looking at the AFL. I'm looking at Ethan Conrad taking batting practice.
Sure.
Swing looks pretty good. Really good swing. I'm already thinking GM meetings in 3 weeks. Like, the World Series will be fun. I've moved on. 2025 is a thing of the past.
Yeah. And I think one of the things we talk about each year when the World Series comes around, when the Cubs haven't been in it, I think I usually ask you, do you think, is there anything for us to take from the two teams that are actually in it? And I don't think so.
I mean, what I remember is what's behind me. Every time I see the World Series logo, I'm like, oh yeah, we won one of those 9 years ago. The years keep adding up. But truthfully, I look at teams like Seattle. I mean, crushing loss. I feel genuinely bad for their fans. I look at Cleveland over the years, San Diego, spending all that money. They're not winning World Series, right?
Yeah.
The windows always seem longer than they are. And they close suddenly and abruptly for many teams. But you know what we did, Corey? We got that World Series ring.
We got the one.
I will be saying that till the day
we lived through the one. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't complain about the roster and these other things.
Well, that's what the next 55 minutes are for. But for now, I feel pretty good.
No, I think that was a more interesting question perhaps a few years ago, like when Arizona made the World Series. And I think it was relevant to at least discuss, how do GMs approach this? Do they feel, as some speculate, like just go for that mid 80s thing and hope you can sneak in? But Toronto's a team that spends money, certainly was willing to spend more money, as we saw from some of those free agent reports. And obviously the Dodgers are the standard
Well, the way the
bearer.
Dodgers are doing it this year is very different than last World Series run. I mean, their entire starting pitching staff is healthy. Yamamoto, Glasnow, Snell, Shohei, they're all starting. I mean, quite frankly, four of the best starting pitchers from a stuff perspective we've seen in decades, right? Last World Series run was more of a bullpen game. Jack Flaherty getting guys who did not produce during the year in a point of pitching productive innings. Very different shapes, if you will, which is, to tie it full circle, what Jed Hoyer was talking about this past week on the shape of seasons and teams and whether it's random or not.
Yeah. I also, finishing on some, World Series thoughts, although this is an ALS thought, I'm quite confident that if you put the Cubs in that exact situation, it's Brad Keller pitching to George Springer. And we are not sitting here with, I think it was Joe Davis asking, like, why is the closer in the bullpen? Why is it not the closer now? This is the moment. This is the game. I think that was a good example. Not that Craig Counsell is the first to do it, but we talked so much throughout the season of like, who's the closer, and like, doesn't really matter. What matters is who's the guy you go to when the fire is on, and who's the guy you're looking to, like, hey, this is the game. And I feel reasonably confident we would not be sitting here saying, what were they doing? Like, why was this guy just sitting in the bullpen? So not that anybody feel better, but
no, I mean, poor Seattle, right? You have to talk about that the entire offseason. I mean, Cal Rowley's crying in the dugout or in the clubhouse.
Yeah.
Ooh, Brian.
Well, and I mean, that's a brutal way to go down for a team that's never been, to feel like you had it. And I mean, especially they were up 2-0 in Seattle, winning that game 3, 2-0. And they did not end up in.
Well, I feel bad for Seattle Mariner Nico Hoerner too. He lost the ALCS as well.
Right.
No?
After the great season, who was that? Yeah. Castillo or Brian Wu we're going to have for the Cubs?
It was Brian Wu. That's right.
And we'll see if those rumors start again, though I would hope after the season that Nico Hoerner had, they do not. So what we wanted to get into, I think there's going to be plenty of time in this offseason and these shows. And I know Luke and Joey and the guys are going to talk about this too on CHGO Cubs. But, we can look into, should they sign Alex Bregman? Should they sign Pete Alonso? Should they re-sign Kyle Tucker? Stuff like that. But there's plenty of time for that. I don't know that we need to get into that now. We talked about it a little bit last week, and some of this conversation will veer into that. But I think until the World Series is over, you start to get arbitration figures, non-tenders, and real conversation about these free agents. I don't want to have the same conversation 5 weeks in a row where we just, Pete Alonso would look great, but what are they going to do with Matt Shaw? So what we wanted to do in this episode was talk about that specific topic. And appreciate, I see Daniel in our YouTube chat offering his thoughts. If you have thoughts on this, we appreciate it. We are reading them. Two halves for the Cubs. So we'll look at some of the bigger offensive numbers, I think is where that disparity really shows out. But as most of you know, first half for the Chicago Cubs, they were 57-39. They had a run differential. They scored 512 runs and gave up 393 runs. In the second half, both of those differentials shrink. They were 35-31, and they scored 281 runs and gave up 256. So a big disparity in those things. We could look at the pitching as well, but I think initially the focus here on the offense. So as Jed Hoyer was talking about, like, what did that mean? Why did that happen? Is it something that they can predict for the future? And I think especially, Brendan, the key to me about this conversation is, as we've talked about, unless Jed and company really, look to move some guys, trade some guys, or maybe sign a free agent that pushes someone like Matt Shaw into more of a super utility 2016 Javier Baez kind of role, you have a lot of guys kind of locked into roles based on their contract, their performance. So without some trades, there's not a ton of space to just, it's different than other off seasons where you have big openings at position. Well, like, hey, let's sign a free agent catcher and a free agent shortstop and a free agent center fielder. Like, this Cubs team has a lot of guys sort of locked in. So I think the key to this question is, how do we look at how they performed in 2025 and some of the extreme peaks and valleys, and what do we make of that as we look ahead to 2026?
Yeah, and Jed Hoyer poured cold water over the topic of, is there meaningful signal in the first half and second half? It appeared as if he chalked it up to randomness, and he talked about other teams, Yankees, Dodgers. You look at the, quote unquote juggernauts this year and over the years, you do have that month-to-month variance team wide of offensive production. I will say, I think that's too zoomed out.
I agree with you.
I disagree that there isn't signal there. The signal is going to be projected in the 2026 numbers. Seiya Suzuki's 340 weighted on base average second half is going to be projected by a dip in his overall projection, and not dip in terms of previous years, dip in what you and I, the fan, thought he was achieving in 2025. So there is signal there. The signal is that the first half we saw some of those booming emergences from PCA, from Seiya, it wasn't real. It wasn't as good as you and I thought it could be. And so I think if you look at it from that perspective, then you start thinking, okay, well, then the projection is going to be the same entering 2025 from the front office's perspective, in our perspective, and by all these different outlets' perspective. If that's the case, you're losing Kyle Tucker. And I know there's a lot of annoyance with Tucker's second half and the injuries, but you're losing 5 wins above replacement. You're not buying that in one player on the market unless you bring Tucker back. How are you going to bring in 5 wins in right field or a different position? And there's no obvious guy on the market like you talked about. So I do think, as we sit here now, expecting this team to be better next season relies on younger players taking those next steps. I imagine that could happen. I'm not comfortable with that. You know how I am as a fan. I want confidence. And right now, you are not going to get confidence in the 26 projections unless you make moves outside the organization.
Yeah, I do think it's somewhere in the middle. I think waving it off as completely meaningless doesn't necessarily work for me. There is a randomness to it, right? Like, baseball has a lot of randomness to it. Who you're facing, stretches where you face really good pitching, travel, and just, we've seen this. Like, certain guys, Ian Happ is a great example of this. Like, a guy whose overall numbers at the end of the year usually are very consistent, very solid for his position, the money he's making, all those things. But if you only looked at that, you would be missing somewhat of, like, how does that actually come about in the season? And we did see this from this team. Like, this offense was not consistent and often, struggled a bit in the grand scheme of things in that second half. We also saw some of these guys, with really drastic differences in those
and
splits.
That's why they won 92 games, which, again, it's a lot of wins, but it's the reason they're not winning 95 plus. My comfort level is 95 plus. So when they're not winning 95, those values you're talking about, it doesn't sit well with me. There was a time there in the end of May, early June, that I'm thinking those values are not going to be real for us, that we're going to be extended beyond that.
And I think some of the middle ground comes from too, Brendan. Like, some of it, when I say randomness, like, some of it is just the way things line up. We talk about sequencing within the game, but in the grand scheme of a season, it also works in a similar fashion. Like, sometimes injuries just pile up at the wrong time, or you have guys with extreme hot stretches at the same time and extreme cold stretches at the same time, part of which is baked into who they are as players and the way you may project them. But ultimately, like, it's unlikely that it's something where you can attribute a great reason as to why some of the guys are struggling at the same time. And we ask those questions like, man, what happened to these guys all, in this second half in this year? I think in particular, it was like Bush and Seiya and PCA kind of struggled right around that like all-star break time, coming out of the all-star break all at the same time. Like, I don't think there's a grand reason for that. Like, oh, there was a bug going around the clubhouse, or they were all working on a mechanical change that was bad. Unfortunately, it just happens at the same time. So some of it is part of this like overall just big picture like baseball randomness, but I at the same time I don't think you can write it off as not something you have to take a look at when you're figuring out the identity of this team and trying to get better going into next year. Some of it you're going to be able to control, some of it you won't. But we'll keep diving in. We're going to hit our first ad break here, and then we'll continue talking about 2025 and how Jed can build for 2026.
Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. And right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Win or lose, just sign up, use code CHGO365, deposit $10, place a $5 bet to unlock $200 in bonus bets. You can use them on spreads, totals, player props, futures, and more. Plus, check out these offers you can plug depending what you're looking at. You want to bet basketball, you want to bet football, you want to bet baseball World Series. You can win early if your team, let's say you bet the Blue Jays, your team goes ahead by 5 runs. You can bet straight parlays in those legs count. So whether it's football, baseball, or building a wild parlay, Bet365 makes every moment bigger. In breaking news, it's playoff season again. Perfect time to jump in with that bet $5. You can get $200 with this offer using code CHGO365. Must be 21 or over. Bonus bets issued after bet settlement and expires after 7 days. If you or somebody you know has a gambling problem, code 1-800-GAMBLER, in-app only. All right, Corey. Toyota. Toyota has 25 vehicles with available all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive. The RAV4 has legendary versatility. The Grand Highlander's adult-size third row is for real, and the Tacoma's wild side comes standard. From job sites to campsites and game nights, there's also the all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive Toyota to get you there in style. Find yours at toyota.com or visit your Chicagoland Toyota dealer today. Toyota, let's go places. Also, become a CHGO diehard and upgrade your fandom today. Get access to our exclusive rank content, a free t-shirt, plenty of discounts on future merch and events, plus access to our CHGO Discord lounge where we all hang out and talk Chicago sports and so much more. Go to allchgo.com for the latest information on how you can join the thousands of CHGO diehards in our community. We cannot wait to connect with you on an even greater level.
All right, Brendan, I think one of the key disparities that we can look at from the first half and the second half are two of the hottest hitters. They kind of carry the offense a bit in that first half, especially early April, May, March, I guess, to Kyle Tucker and Carson Kelly. So Kyle Tucker in the first half, as defined by Fangraphs, you can obviously change these samples however you want. 145 WRC plus, 375 weighted on base average. Carson Kelly, 151 WRC plus, 385 weighted on base average. Those numbers in the second half, 115 and 333 for Kyle Tucker. Carson Kelly, much lower, 69 and 265 for Carson Kelly. So I think that was, certainly something where you got those big performances and they really carried things. And I think in particular with Tucker, that's one of the areas that I think some of the fan base that has kind of moved on from him completely based on how kind of the season finished with the injuries and, rolling over to first all the time and the numbers going down. Like, part of the reason that they had that cushion and could kind of stomach some of the stuff that happened in the second half was because of that big performance in the first half, especially by these two guys, not just these two guys alone. But that is certainly something. And Daniel in our YouTube chat raised a good point. Now, this is obviously very difficult to quantify or, really confirm or deny. But it is fair, I think, to wonder what effect those guys being red hot, especially like those early months where, Kyle Tucker was hovering around 1,000 OPS. We were comparing Carson Kelly to Barry Bonds for a number of reasons, mostly satirical, but some of which were legitimate in terms of his swing changes. But it is, it's reasonable, I think, for us as fans to wonder, like, did that help some of the other guys in the lineup? Was a hot PCA start improved or at least affected by the fact that you had two guys at least at the top of this order that, as if we were playing, NBA hang time or whatever, like their shoes were on fire. Like these guys were absolutely on fire. Did that kind of set things up for some of these other guys through the lineup? Again, very difficult to figure out. We'd have to know how they were pitching, some of these guys, and if it was affected by that. But certainly when you have a couple guys that look as though you cannot get them out, right? Like, did that affect the deeper part of the lineup so that when those guys struggle in the second half, Kyle Tucker really just coming down to like a normal good hitter versus his kind of superstar first half? Carson Kelly, not great in that second half. So you do, and I think the Kelly thing in particular, Brendan, really we saw that effect. And apologies for my like wild train of thought here, but Kelly in particular, I think one of the big things that played into the second half conversation, once he cooled down and didn't look like the Barry Bonds we were talking about, that's when we started to really get the daily, well, this guy shouldn't be hitting fifth. Who should be hitting fifth? He can't hit fifth. Dansby can't hit fifth. You got to get Carson Kelly out of the 4 spot. You got to get Carson Kelly out of the 5 spot. That's when we really started to see kind of the like, oh, okay, is this lineup as deep as it kind of seemed for those first few months? Right. And these are, questions that they have to answer as they're building the team next year, where right now you don't have Kyle Tucker at all.
And those first half booming performances you're talking about, Carson Kelly, Kyle Tucker, Seiya Suzuki, it did allow for the iteration process of Matt Shaw. Shaw was one of the worst offensive contributors in the first half. But in the second half on the team, he was one of the most valuable bats in that lineup. So in the second half, only Ian Happ had a higher WRC plus than Matt Shaw. Shaw in the second half, his WRC plus was 130, weight on base average 354. Ian Happ was nearly 370 for his WOBA and 140 for his WRC plus. So when we're talking over the years about allowing guys to develop and having the space to develop, I think for you, you've mentioned about the pressure, right? Having guys may not succumb to pressure because they're batting 4th, 5th, or 6th while developing. For me, the way I interpreted that was, well, you allow these guys to adjust because you're top heavy producing value due to superstars. Kyle Tucker, as the example, Seiya Suzuki, as one of the examples in the first half. And because you produce so many runs, that lower end failing iteration process allowed Shaw to find what eventually did work for him because of that failure. When those bats are not available, we're not producing runs, obviously, in the first half, but it makes those glaring developmental timelines even more glaring. It stands out more. And once you can mirror it together where you have, let's say, second half Kyle Tucker or second half Seiya Suzuki matching what you saw in the first half, then Matt Shaw's boom is even more glaringly good. Ian Happ's performance in the second half stands out more, and you become that 95+ win team. The fear is that we're not going to have that next year unless you get Carson Kelly 2.0, Barry Bonds in the first half. It's difficult to imagine without a Kyle Tucker how you can confidently get one of those guys to come out of their shell. Moises Ballesteros, Owen Casey, and so on.
Yeah, I think they're going to continue banking on some of that regardless. I mean, every team is to some degree, but we've heard Jed specifically talk about internal improvements, growth from that perspective. And especially, again, just with the way that they've spent money, whether we like it or not, and the lack of, a lot of space to just throw, 3 free agent bats or something like that into this lineup, you're going to be banking on some of that, right? You're going to be banking on Matt Shaw to maybe not necessarily take that same leap that we saw from PCA in the first half, but to be much more like the second half version that had a 130 WRC plus, and who had a better second half than Alex Bregman that everybody's talking about. But you need him to
Maybe
continue
Alex
that.
Bregman's on the team next year.
Listen, I liked it last offseason. I still like it now. I think there's enough.
You? I don't know.
I don't know.
Right? I mean, it's going to set up a longer discussion throughout the offseason. But
that one honestly maybe depends on the contract. But
yeah, I mean, but
they're gonna have to inject reliable offense into this if they don't.
I feel like when we're talking about the offense, and I get some of the frustration with Tucker, I do, but I'm not satisfied with the alternative right now. If Tucker's not coming back, we're always, criticizing the front office for not buying more, like certainty. And then at the same time, I'm doing this too. It's like, all right, well, at least I don't have to deal with Tucker's injury. Like, at least I don't have to worry about Tucker's age decline. But what I don't put in the forefront of my head is, how are you going to replace 5 wins? Like, that is so important. And I don't see how right now this team enters next season as an obvious improved offensive team. I don't see that path forward without creativity, and it gives me a lot of concern. And I feel as if we're pushing aside the Tucker situation a little bit too much, and I don't really think we should be doing that.
I mean, I'm not. I'm still quite interested in him. I think a lot of the pushing aside is related to just one. I think, there's, like I said, a lot of people are just particularly frustrated with how that played out. And I think, too, a lot of people are just like resigning themselves to that they're not going to do it. And I think they've given up on that exercise.
Like, even if it's not Tucker, it's like, all right, well, who's coming in play right field? Like, who's going to be hitting 280? Say it's playing right field. Well, who's going to be DH? Right now, I'd be Moises Ballesteros and Owen Casey, and you just hope and pray to God that everything comes together. No, like, that's what's
I don't want them to do this, but you and I joked about this. Like, you can hear Jed saying it, can't you? Like,
of course you can. Yeah. So there's two thinking sides to this. One is, which I understand, and I'm guilty of it too. It's like, all right, well, Tucker's not coming back, the injuries, whatever. It could be a good thing. The second side, and to me, when you really think about this, the most pertinent side is, well, who is replacing Tucker? And Fangraphs projections last year for the Cubs were 83. It wasn't that high. Pacoda was 91, okay? But going from 83 to plus 90 without Tucker in that projection is not going to happen. You take Tucker out of this, you're looking at an upper 80s win projection, and that's just unacceptable in my fans' point of view. And right now, it seems that's the likely outcome unless you get super creative, and I hope they do get super creative.
Yeah. Before we hit another ad break here, and a couple things I want to note on the offense too. I see our guy Jansen in the YouTube chat. I think he's waiting for the Blackhawks podcast, which our Blackhawks crew does an excellent job. But also ask, who do you have winning the World Series? I would expect the Dodgers to win. I'd prefer Toronto win. Brendan and I are not fans of the Los Angeles Dodgers for a variety of reasons. But I think Toronto can hang with them. Your boy, Kevin Gossman. I think they have a shot. I think they have a better shot, than other teams that were in this field. But until somebody dethrones them, I think you kind of have to default. It's the easier thing to say to try to end up looking correct, right? Like, I don't know why I would be bold and predict otherwise, but it'd be cool. Be cool to see. One thing I did want to note on the offense as we continue to talk about this, like, the conversation is about how different the two halves were and what it means as they look to project this team for 2026, how they attack this offseason, whatever. I also, though, don't want it to sound like this offense sucked in the second half. They were in the middle of the pack. They had a middle of the road OPS. Now, that's not necessarily what you want. And like for a team in this market, and, you know, we're a few years removed from the retool, not rebuild, right? Like you want to be making that progress and not be in the middle of the pack. But they were 4th in overall OPS in the first half. They were 16th in the second half. That's not good enough. Like that, trust me, that's not what I'm sitting here saying. But the overall picture, this was a pretty good offense. For a good stretch of this season, they were one of the better offenses in the league. Now, if you lose Kyle Tucker and you ask these questions about consistency, and there's a lot of fair questions, right? Do you get second half Matt Shaw? Do you get first half Matt Shaw? Do you get somewhere in the middle? Do you get first half PCA? Do you get second half PCA? Do you get something closer to the middle? Do you get the kind of lost September Seiya Suzuki, or do you get the Seiya Suzuki that we saw for like 2 straight years before that, where he was a top 15 hitter in baseball? These are big questions. Same with Carson Kelly. Do you get anything close to what you saw in those first couple months, or do you get more of like a, hey, this is fine enough from a 32-year-old catcher who's calling good games, throwing runners out, like this is fine, right? These are big questions. And it's why you're speaking to, Brendan, like that's not a particularly comfortable place to be necessarily when you are a market of this size and trying to continue getting over these humps. Cubs got over a lot of humps in this season. They made the playoffs again. They won more than 83 games like they had past 2 seasons. They won a playoff series. They won several playoff games in this field, but we got to keep pressing forward, right? Not going backward, not regressing and things like that. And so I think that's the exercise here. And it does get a lot more complicated if you lose Kyle Tucker. People can argue about, is he worth what the price is going to be? You know, how will they age, you know, given some of the injuries we saw and how it affected his play? That's fine. He's still a really good player. And his overall year was still extremely productive and important to this team. I don't think it's as a lot of people seem very quick to wash their hands of it. And I wouldn't be, but I also don't expect them to enter into the deeper pool, you know, that they're going to have to make that happen. So maybe it's all a moot point.
All right, let's do our second ad break here. We've got a lot to talk about and we'll move on. Fall is here. Crisp air, football, maybe a bonfire or two. But if you're like most guys, you're still putting in work. And yeah, that means sweats. Don't let body odor sideline you. It's game day. You've been grinding all week. And your lucky jersey might be smelling just a little bit too lucky. Let's be real. Regular deodorant just does not cut it after a long day. That's why there's the real game changer. It is Mando Deodorant Plus Sweat Control. 1 stick, 2 jobs, powerful odor, and sweat control. This stuff actually stops odor before it even starts. No more masking, just long-lasting freshness. It has clinical strength sweat control. 1 swipe, and you're good for 72 hours. If you're new to Mando, grab the starter pack. You get the solid stick, a cream tube, 2 free products of your choice, like mini body wash or deodorant and wipes, plus free shipping. And right now, new customers get 20% off site-wide with our exclusive code CHGO. That's shopmando.com, SHOPMANDO.com. Support the show and tell them we sent you. Mando's got you covered with deodorant plus sweat control. Say goodbye to sweat stains and hello to long-lasting freshness. New vehicles are in store at Ray Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram, and this is your chance to score a great deal at the Drive Into Fall event. Head to Ray CDJR on Route 12 today to choose from their huge inventory of new Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram vehicles. Right now, get 0% financing for 72 months available on new models, plus shop over 125 vehicles priced under $20,000. And with a friendly team of brand experts, the team at Ray CDJR is here to help you during each step of your car shopping journey. With Ray's Price Promise, you get to shop confidently with no add-ons or hidden fees ever. Do not miss out on the Drive Into Fall event for huge savings on new models. For more information, visit Ray CDJR today on Route 12 in Fox Lake or online at raycdjr.com. They've been serving the community since 1963.
So here's a question for you, Brendan. As we kind of think about this, listening to Jed's press conference, he didn't necessarily say that this is what they're going to do, but how their spending habits and just some of the way that they built this team. He alluded to their defense and their pitching being somewhat of like cornerstones of how this team was built to win games. He talked about the defense a lot, and Dansby, Nico, PCA, etc., and how that played into their ability to win games. As we think about the offense for this front office, not for the fan base, right? Do you think the exercise is how do we keep and create an offense that is simply good enough to score just enough runs, and we continue investing more in defense and pitching, and not necessarily running a complete like run prevention system, but the exercise is less in like, how do we build this juggernaut of an offense, to go back to the ever famous quote about blowing teams out. And it's more an exercise in like looking at this group and saying, this is our best path to win. Again, I'm not saying that my goal as a fan is for them to score 4 runs a game and prevent, less than 4. And that's just the way they do it. But when you look at this group and we look at their spending habits, do you think that's how this front office is maybe approaching this particular group as their best way forward?
I don't think there's a formula. I don't think there's I think the puzzle is wins, however they come. So if they're going to come in the form of hitting home runs, then that's the opportunity they'll take. If it's a form of coming from pitching, then they'll take the opportunity as well. I don't think they look at the defense and they think, okay, well, we have the best defense in the league. Let's just layer onto that because they have the best defense. It's more like, okay, here's the projected wins from that defense. If I can add in 3 more wins because of adding 2 guys in the outfield with depth, then I'm going to go ahead and do that, right? It's about just projecting value. Now, to the actual question, what if you go out and get pitching to match with that defense and you kind of take a step back offensively? Okay, right? It's all about just what the range and variance in that projected value is. If they go the pitching route, they use some of the money that they would save from Tucker, they get 3, 4, 5 more pitchers, then there's still volatility in some of those profiles. It depends who it is. If they get that money spent on Dylan Cease, right? You just subtract Tucker's contract, give it to Dylan Cease. Well, you're going to see how that's projected in 26 once Pacoda comes out. It's not going to be what you like because you have just huge range of potential outcomes. I think it's not as simple as just adding on to defense. I think it's more how you just create more wins no matter where it comes from. And that's where I get a little bit of concern because I don't see that in the open market right now without having Kyle Tucker back. It has to come through some type of trade or unfortunately internal development that will not be reflected in those projections.
Yeah. And I have a strong belief in some of these guys. I agree with our guy Daniel in the chat. Like, I think PCA, he obviously struggled mightily at times in that second half, but I think he's much closer to the first half in terms of his overall production, or at least a nice healthy medium. And when you look at his overall year for a guy that is one of, if not the best defensive player in the game, a threat on the bases and slugging to the tune of 30 home runs, excellent player, excellent value, even if he just repeated that exact same line. But I think for someone so young, and we have seen him make such drastic adjustments in the different stretches in his career, like maybe he doesn't get back to a consistent level of that like top offensive production that we saw.
Then the question would be, would you be comfortable slotting him in the middle of the order, knowing what the floor and ceiling is? The ceiling was an MVP pace, and the floor was a below league average replacement offensive.
Yeah.
Would you be comfortable with him in the middle of the order? It's shaky, right? Like for me,
betting on it. I mean, look, like that's what the money's supposed to do. Is you shouldn't have to bet on some of this stuff, right?
Yeah. And that's the value of having guys like Chris Bryant and Rizzo over the years and Tucker. And I thought we were getting that with Seiya, but even Seiya is not that guy. And that's to the first point when we're talking about the shapes of two halves. It wasn't random because Seiya has done that before. And that's why his overall value ends up being, even though he's top 15, like you said, it ends up being not top 8, not top 7, not top 6 that you would want from a juggernaut offense.
Well, so I think then the question turns, because look, like, I think whether they build what I was joking about before was it seems extremely easy to envision, right? A Jed Hoyer or Tom Ricketts press conference or quote from someone that gets put out where it's like, well, we didn't make the big splash in free agency, but we really believe in our guys like Ballesteros and Owen Casey to take that next step and really take us. Like you can hear it right now. Like as Kyle Tucker goes to the Yankees and Schwartz goes back to Philly and Cody Bellinger goes somewhere else. Not even necessarily that I want some of these guys or, whatever, but you can just hear it.
But do you remember, like, I was thinking about this for the past week and tell me if I'm crazy or not, but remember when Jed Hoyer was talking about the previous core, Albert Almora, that group of guys?
Yeah, that he hung on too long.
And like, I'm looking at how they maneuvered Jorge Soler for Wade Davis. And like, I know we're talking about Ballesteros and Owen Casey being a contributor. And I think you should think like that unless you're told otherwise. But there's also part of me that's curious. I'm like, all right, are you going to wait too long again?
I mean, I think I still wouldn't be surprised if at some point they swing a trade for higher tier pitching. I think they were clearly interested in that. They were interested in
Joe Ryan is perhaps going to be traded from Minnesota.
Well, I mean, we heard those rumors in the offseason, that maybe they didn't like Luzardo's medicals. We know they were interested at the deadline, but even Jed openly admitted like the prices were too high. They just didn't, and those guys didn't end up moving because those prices were too high. I still wouldn't be surprised if they continue to revisit that. And that does pair somewhat with my question to you about not necessarily selling out for pitching and defense, but looking at that as the angle of like, this is the best way to improve this team. Because I think the larger question, Brendan, and what I did want to add before I say the larger question, not that I don't believe in Owen Casey, but I really do believe that Ballesteros can be a contributor on the offensive level. Do I want to like commit a position to him and just forego reliable free agents or guys via trade? Not necessarily, but I do believe in him as someone that can contribute in this offense. And he is one of those guys where like, I think you got to give it a shot or.
Yeah. I just don't like believing. Like, I don't like having a sense of belief because it means there's discussion about that not coming to fruition.
Sure.
Right. And so I like the formula that we saw play out in the first half. My expectation is guys like Ballesteros will struggle. Owen Casey will struggle because we've seen it with every single Cubs prospect dating back to 2014. I mean, hell, even Rizzo and San Diego in 2012 and 2013, right?
Yeah.
So I need to build in a reserve for that. And I look at the team right now and I'm like, all right, well, you got Seiya who kind of does the whole volatility thing, right? And so on and so on.
I think how I would look at this and kind of tying back into our overall prompt for the evening is all guys, right, go through splits. They are excellent for 1 week, maybe not great the next week. Like you can boil down anybody and find a poor stretch, etc. But we do know that like there are guys on this team that are particularly prone to it and they stand out. They're kind of extreme in how they come about. Ian Happ, as I said, very consistent overall player, but he definitely has periods where it stands out that he's just not as locked in.
He's a consistent top 25th percentile bat,
yeah,
which is valuable and why he's being paid $60 million and not $200 million.
Dansby, obviously not a guy that is key for his offense, but he still also has those stretches where he's just dreadful for
and
periods
it's why
of time.
He's not making $350 million like Trey Turner.
If he did with his glove, right, he would.
Correct.
You hope that as guys like PCA or Matt Shaw grow, that inconsistency diminishes a little bit, but it's hard to tell. Seiya, as we've talked about, is a guy who looks great 6 of 7 months of the year, but that 7th month is wretched. And that's just something we've sort of seen from him over time. So Michael Busch was more consistent, but he also I think around that All-Star break time struggled a bit, looked a bit lost, but then he kicked it back into gear. Overall, I think he was solidly above league average in the second half, very in the first half. So maybe he's not as streaky as some of these other guys, but he's also a big platoon split guy. So he's not doing it usually against both sides of pitchers. So I think the reason I point all that out is that's not going to go away. If this is a bulk of who your team is, some of that inconsistency is not going to go away.
Do they even have a choice?
Well, do they have a choice? But that's where I get back into the key for next year. And when we come back from one final ad break, we'll talk about options to maybe mitigate this if it's out there. But you just kind of, to a degree, you have to just kind of hope, Brendan, that it just doesn't happen at the same time. That's one of the things. And there may not be a way around that. Maybe with different guys on your bench and subbing guys in based on matchups and things like that, you can kind of try to cut it off as it's happening. But what we saw in 2025 was you just had a handful of key contributors experiencing this at the same time. And that's when you saw the offense start to take a tick. And we started playing those games we saw every night, Brendan, where it was 2-1 or 3-2. And every single night it was, help Matthew Boyd is perfect tonight because they're not going to score any more runs. Hopefully when they turn it over to Kittredge and Palencia and Keller, they don't give up any runs because it's 2-1 now. And that 2 is going to stay. They have to keep the other one at 1.
All right, let's hit our final ad break here, finish up this discussion. College football is back. Tailgates, rivalries, marching bands. Nothing beats being in the stadium with thousands of fans losing their minds with you. But getting tickets, that's the part that always ruins the hype. You're stuck in queues, clicking through endless logins, and right before checkout, boom, there you go. Prices jump out of nowhere. All I want to do is get in the building without that headache. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives you advantage back to the fans. It's the hack for unlocking amazing tickets experiences in just a few taps. I was looking at Game Time a couple weeks ago for the USC Michigan game. I'm like, oh, that looks pretty interesting. When USC ended up winning their particular game against the boys in blue, right? You could get pretty cheap prices, right, Corey? Were you looking at that too? Plus, you can follow your favorite teams to get the alerts the moments new deals drop, and with the lowest price guarantee. If you find a lower price elsewhere, Game Time credits you 110% off the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. If you're not seeing Corey's face right now, I'm in big trouble over here. Let me tell you that. Download the app. Use code CHGO for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Tap to go. Download Game Time today.
You're not in big trouble. I do think it should be up to our wonderful YouTube viewers or our podcast listeners. You guys decide. Brendan is talking trash on
I'm not talking trash.
Now hold on.
I'm not talking
my
trash.
Alma mater, but he's using his grad school institution.
I've been at many.
I don't think that's fair. I don't have one. I didn't go to grad school.
Well, that's
I think you should have to wear and own Arizona State a bit more than you take credit for USC, only when convenient for you. That's my opinion.
Listen,
but we'll leave
I mean,
that
the PHNX guys, and we can get along as well. Put me in a studio. I can talk Sun Devil football.
All right. Anyway,
Cubs related, right?
Yeah. Yes. Back to it. I can spin that. Is Jordan Wogu still in the system? We can get back to the Cubs quickly
actually?
From Michigan baseball. But yeah, centering back on the offense. So I guess the question then becomes, Brendan, when you look at this offseason, outside of re-signing Kyle Tucker, do you find avenues that would mitigate some of what we've discussed? Is it just a necessary baked-in risk to the group that they have and a group that they've committed to in large part, right, for better or worse at a lot of these positions? How do they go about it? And I asked you this last week too, because I remember it coming up. Somebody said it at the press conference. They asked Jed, like, should you just go and get more Nico Horners, right? Firstly, like wishful thinking.
Sure.
They don't grow on trees. But even putting that in more literal terms, does this team need more higher average but conceding lower slug guys? Because that seems to be what that suggestion. I don't know the reporter that asked that to Jed, and I think Jed gave one of his usual PR like workaround kind of answers to that. I'll start just by noting, like, not that they're all of that caliber, but I think if you want to see the risk of building an offense that relies more on like Nico Horner types, it's what happened to the Brewers in the NLCS. Like, it's very hard when you're facing good pitching. Now, a lot of those hitters are not as good as Nico Horner in terms of their contact ability, their ability to hit for average, pitch selection, etc. But that team succeeded a lot on contact, making contact, putting the ball in play, getting softer hits, forcing the defense, things like that. The problem is when you don't slug, if the ball finds gloves and you're facing Blake Snell and Tyler Glasnow and Yamamoto and Shohei Ohtani and Roki Sasaki, not
Does
as easy
anyone
to
have a chance?
not as no, but not as easy to dip those 75-mile-an-hour line drives into left field, right? And like hope that a bleeder to third base turns into an extra base hit like we saw somewhat throughout. And that's, whatever on the Brewers. I'm not trying to diminish them, but I'm just saying, like, is that the answer? Do they need to sign Pete Alonso? Do they need to bring back Tucker? Like, what helps mitigate this? Or, as I said before we hit our second or our third ad break, like, is it just like you need some of these guys to not get cold at the same time? And then the horses that are driving the cart, like Kyle Tucker, you can't have them get hurt and their production diminish by 30, 40% and expect the offense to just pick up the pieces.
We talk about teams on a year-to-year basis, right? We're talking about the 2026 Cubs because that's what's in front of our face right now. Jed Hoyer's front office is extended for the next 5 years. They're looking at, okay, you have 26, you have 27, you have 28. You have this large puzzle that needs to be pieced together. So 26 on paper may not be as projectable as 27. 26 may end up taking a step back in projections because you are losing Tucker. So you may still shoot for the upper 80s. You may shoot for low 90s if you're being ambitious for this front office. But ultimately, it comes back to the point you talked about with Ballesteros and Casey and PCA and seeing, okay, what exactly is that range of outcomes? Is it as narrow as we hope it is in the positive direction? Or is it so volatile that by 27, once we have all this money off the books, maybe we end up shrinking that down and maybe let's give 26 this last look. Let's go spend a lot on pitching. Let's shore up the depth that way. Let's get a little bit better with the positional side. No more John Birdies, no more Justin Turners, no more Willie Castros with negative value. And let's shrink down the margins with depth. And the way I talk about that doesn't that seem likely at this point? Because you do have just Seiya, Ian, Nigo expiring contracts, Tyone expiring contract. Like, this is the team they built, and they probably will have to see it through.
Yeah, I do continue to think ultimately the emphasis is going to be on pitching. I just think that's the direction this offseason goes, whether it's free agency, whether it is trading some of those high-level prospects for pitching, kind of finally pulling the trigger, trying to find a cost-controlled ace, someone who you can slot in to go along with this rotation. But I think we talked about this last week too. Like, the pitching has enough questions on its own. You're losing a lot of those bullpen guys that were on shorter term contracts. You have some questions in the rotation just in terms of, what do they do with the Shota Imanaga option decision? What does he look like if he comes back and rehabs from that injury? When does Justin Steele get on the mound? What does he look like? What's his durability as that goes out? Does Matthew Boyd recover from this full season? A lot of innings, a lot of pitches on that arm. Cade Horton, how does he come back from that latest injury? How does he look in his first full season? And now, granted, I'm not worried about a lot of those things, but they are reasonable questions. It's not like we're sitting here and we can just look at those 4 or 5 guys, Tyone included, and just say, yeah, they'll all pitch 200 innings and make 32 starts. And that's the plan, unless something crazy happens. Like, no, there's some legitimate questions of exactly how you're going to do that. But we've seen this team succeed in terms of putting together a pitching staff and figuring out how to make those starts and get the most out of so many guys. And I think that's the exciting part of the pitching development, when you see what they're able to do with guys like Drew Pomeranz and Brad Keller, guys that other teams like just weren't able to figure out. And they come here and they have great success and are guys that are being relied on relatively deep into a playoff run. And I just think they're going to continue to hammer that. I think that's going to be the emphasis this offseason. If they lose Tucker, even Jed talked about needing to replace that and at least add something back into this
cleanup
lineup.
For your Chicago Cubs, right fielder Cody Bellinger.
Well, and what's funny about that too is, like, you want to talk about like volatility in a tale of halves. Like, let me introduce you to Cody Bellinger. Do you going to get the 2023 version, the 24 version, the Yankees version? Even that was very different in those two halves.
Same contract, 2 opt-outs, 28 mil annual average value.
Yeah. So I expect them to add something there. And if Tucker leaves, to probably not adequately replace it, but try to, as you said, maybe in the form of multiple players that kind of improve your depth and what you're able to do in different pitching matchups and stuff like that. But I would expect that the emphasis on pitching, you keep the emphasis on defense as you have. And, you hope that those guys make those internal improvements and that Matt Shaw is not as extreme. And maybe he doesn't finish with a 130 WRC plus like he did in the second half, but that where he finds himself is more consistent than the first half extreme. PCA, same thing. Maybe you throw Ballesteros in there and he gives you some production, et cetera, et cetera. And you put the emphasis on the pitching, and that's where you spend the money, and that's where you try to improve. Because ultimately, like, we saw some of that run out of gas, and it's not, I don't think, why they got knocked out of the playoffs. But when you look at this, offense in the playoffs is hard. It's going to be hard. And the one thing that you can at least try to control a little better than they ended up in this season was not having your starters run out of gas and not having, your relievers in a position where you're feeling like, man, if we don't roll Brad Keller and Daniel Palencia back out there again, like, I don't know what we're going to do. And so I think that's the area that they key in on more than the offense.
You got 2 minutes here. Just a quick thought, then you can sign off. Would you be surprised if they trade Matt Shaw? And then you go out and
traded him?
Yeah. Think so.
So what, like sign Bregman, trade Shaw for pitching?
20 seconds, yeah. 20 seconds. The reason for that is you talked about what was the price for pitching in July. It was Matt Shaw, right? You talk about having a high offensive floor. It's Alex Bregman. You talk about projecting value. Well, Bregman's profile is what the Cubs had just recently signed.
Is it like the wrong answer that my gut instinct on that is less like what I think about that and more just like, I don't want to say, does Jed have the stones for that? But like, that's where my head goes first. It's like crazy to think of them doing that.
I would not be
I guess crazy. You know what? I take that back.
I don't think it's crazy.
I do take that. I do take that back. Jed traded like a big time prospect for Kyle Tucker. I shouldn't say that about, does he have the stones to do it?
Yeah. I would not be surprised. You're talking about you
all on the table.
Yeah. And
we know they like Bregman. It doesn't have to be specifically Bregman. Like, there may be other options. I know some guys getting, or maybe not getting posted from Japan, et cetera, et cetera.
My brain is churning right now.
But we know they like Bregman. No, I mean, I don't think anything is crazy. Look, like
might make sense.
They were overall a good offense in the second half, closer to the middle of the pack. And there's only so many spots where this team can easily improve, right? And that are open and not a no trade clause or a big contract to move or something like that. And third base is those spots. So did they decide to do it? I don't know. It's interesting to think about. Either way, we're going to get out of here. A lot of this, like, you know, it's not a rhetorical question, but it's not stuff you're going to immediately come to the answer to. We'll see how the offseason plays out. We'll see what Jed Hoyer does and how they attack things. But I think they're interesting questions to think about as we get ready for this offseason and how they're going to approach things, rather than looking at everything and just saying, well, just sign Bregman and Alonso and Dylan Cease and Shane Bieber and bring Kyle Tucker back. Boom, problem solved. That's not going to happen. So I think better exercise to kind of try to navigate it with, you know, a little more.
We got the entire 4 months to do this.
Yeah. So Brendan and I will be back with you next Thursday. I didn't look at the schedule, but maybe possible we have a World Series winner if the Dodgers just dispose of Toronto as they have everybody else. But we appreciate your support. We'll keep an eye on the offseason. CHGO Cubs team will have you covered once the World Series is over. And of course, before that, but once stuff starts happening, moves are made, money starts getting thrown around, the CHGO Cubs team will have you covered every day with live shows and taking you through the offseason here. So we'll see what Jed Hoyer has in store for us. We appreciate your support. And as always, go Cubs.
We all silly like the mayor.